Steve Jobs would say, right, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, right? So again, that's part of the pattern matching. I'm spending my time educating my team on the market, doing a similar exercise with an article and having them regurgitate the information back to me. The only way you're going to be comfortable in that one-to-one setting is if you're doing your best to level up on the product and the industry.
Walk me through how you were able to, sell yourself into these companies.
I love this question. The one-word answer to your question is you have to care. Deeply diving into the product they have, asking particular questions to the industry in the interview process. When you show that care in how you're actually preparing for an interview or talking to a technical leader, because they equally care, right? And so I think that ultimately is what led to the combination there and them wanting to bring me on board.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
This episode is brought to you by Demandbase. Demandbase helps B2B companies hit their revenue goals using fewer resources by using the power of AI to identify and engage the accounts and buying groups most likely to purchase. Their account-based technology unites sales and marketing teams around insights that you can understand and facilitates quick actions across systems and channels to deliver big wins. It's flexible, scalable ABM built for you. We are live. Hello and welcome back to the GTM podcast. Got Scott Barker here. As always, we appreciate you sharing your eardrums with us for the next 45 minutes or so. We'll do our best to leave you with some actionable tactics, strategies, stories that will help you scale your business. I got a great guest lined up today. Super excited for this one. I am joined by Robert Brooks. Robert, welcome, man.
Hello.
Fun to have you. And Robert, you're fresh off of paternity leave, so congratulations on the new child. Are you sleeping at all, or?
You know, I had a bit of the ability to travel last week for work, so that was the first sort of 6-hour contiguous sleep that I got. But every time I'm woken up at 3 a.m., I stare into this beautiful living being that looks, unfortunately, a lot like me. And so, it's just pure love. Incredible experience.
I love it, man. That pure love will give you lots of energy, regardless of sleep hours. It's funny. I don't have children of my own yet, and sometimes I complain because I'm on the road a lot. Almost probably like 40% of the time or so. And I come back, it's like work travel is always exhausting. But then you talk to parents, and they're like, "Man, what the fuck are you complaining about? Like when I work travel, then I get like 5-6 hours sleep. It's like the most relaxing time possible. I can order room service, maybe watch a movie, and it's great. And so it gives me good perspective when I'm out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a couple late nights of watching HGTV, getting the Uber Eats. It was pretty great. But in that context of even with the child and getting a couple hours of sleep, there's a new energy that's untapped that's better than any espresso or Red Bull you've ever had. And all of a sudden you're working to close that sale to feed your family. It's pretty primal. It's pretty, I've tapped into a new energy source, which has been really awesome.
We all, search for our whys early in our career, and we try and tap into these different, why are we doing this? And then now your why becomes so simple and there's no complexity. It's like, well, my why is sleeping in the other room right now, and that's it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love it. And how was the trip? You were in SF?
I was in SF, San Jose. We were out there for NVIDIA's GTC Conference, so the number one conference in our space. It was probably like 5 16-hour days, to be completely honest. So I'm not sure I actually did get that much sleep because, we had the opportunity to not only meet NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, who's just really one of the visionary leaders of our time, but he also did stop by our booth and gave out a Lambda chat, which was, you talk about pumping up a sales team on a Monday morning. I sent that first thing this week and we're ready to go.
That's super cool, man. NVIDIA, obviously like the hottest company in the world right now. And then, their CEO is like the most sought after figure, business and otherwise. I'm loving some of the perspectives that he's sharing on kind of the true struggles around entrepreneurship. We were talking before this. He had the one recently where he was actually wishing I think it was the recent Harvard grads, pain and suffering. And that's, the context behind that is, how you build resiliency. And he says the number one marker to success is resiliency. And you don't get that through anything but pain and suffering. So that was his takeaway, to wish everyone a ton of pain and suffering, which I thought was a cool perspective you don't often hear. And then you highlighted the other one where he was asked, if you were to go back, would you start this company again? And it was just a hard no immediately, which again you don't hear very often. It was pretty refreshing. But is he as energetic and eloquent in person?
He absolutely is an incredible figure. I mean, the entire NVIDIA um, uh, company as a true like partner. I think a lot of people sort of just like say like, "Hey, this company's great," and they partner well. Like NVIDIA really stands behind it, and you can see that being driven by him, right? He wants the entire ecosystem around what they're building to flourish. And the fact that this particular guy has got a lot of crazy problems to solve, spending time with us, is interested in and he walked around to multiple partners right at the booth, and I think that's just such an incredible and you see multiple partners sharing pictures with him, right? It's not just a Lambda thing. I think that's just such an incredible sort of you know part about what they're trying to build and how they actually stand behind it, right? It's not just an email saying congratulations; it's a handshake, and I think that's really great.
In your eyes, what makes a good partner? So when you say, they're just an incredible partner, I think traditionally, at least like startups, I would say, software startups, they don't partner that well. There's very few examples of companies that actually have a really good partnership ecosystem and drive a lot of revenue through different channels. When you look at that partnership, what kind of makes it special and I guess profitable for both sides?
That's a good question. I mean, I'll take the sort of Lambda NVIDIA relationship out of context here and just more generally speak about it broadly. For me, I have had my own sort of roadblocks, right, and building sort of true partners in channel sales, both in my current role and at other companies as well, because there's a lot of investment, right? The incentives have to be aligned, right? It's like giving a sales rep that maybe makes $200,000 a year, throwing out a carrot there for them to make like $15 if they do this really sideways thing not related to their pipeline. They're not going to do it, right? The incentives have to be aligned. And so there is a little bit of luck that's involved in a true partnership actually working out, right, where you're adopting each other's technology and ultimately sort of going to market together. There are definitely some really good sort of natural partnerships that start small and then grow, and I really believe in that, right? So we've had a couple partnerships within our current company at Lambda that have, sort of started and trickled in terms of revenue and action and marketing. But if you take the time to invest in them, all of a sudden, what you did 5 years ago really starts to look and make a lot of sense, going forward. And it's very different from sales, right? Sales, I have a monthly number, I have a quarterly number, I have an annual number. I need to hit it, and if I don't, I need to go talk to the next person, right? Partnerships take some time to invest, and then you really only see the payout if you are actually investing in that time over the multiple years that get there. And with folks kind of traveling between roles in multiple years, sometimes you don't even get the opportunity to do that, right? For me, I'm super proud to have been at Lambda for a half a decade, and I see myself there for a very long time. That's when you unlock the true abilities of a sort of sales and partnership lens. You got to dedicate time, right? These things take a while.
Yeah, it's definitely an investment up front, and there is, an element of luck to it. And I think that luck comes from incentives aligning at the right time, at the right place. I think that's a good call out in any partnership. You look at, one-to-one, human-to-human partnerships that work. I think it's just like you're both working towards the same goal, and you're incentivized to hit it together. I love it. Well, it's a good interview when I totally forget to do your bio. So I'm going to do that super quickly for our listeners. So Robert has actually spent 12 years leading sales, marketing, and customer success at usually early stage startups, typically the first sales hire as well, and kind of the first non-technical that's in the business, usually reporting directly to a technical founder. So I kind of love all these red threads. You've almost figured out like, here is what I do best. And you started your career at Charles Schwab, not a typical place a lot of us in tech start. But then you joined Stack Overflow, had a $1.8 billion exit, then Tempo Automation, $900 million IPO, and now is part of the founding team and VP of Revenue at Lambda, $1.5 billion valuation. Lambda is just such a cool company, and so I'm excited to dive more into your time there, but also an advisor to several top-tier VC firms. We're super lucky to have you involved in GTM Fund, so thank you. And really just part of some of the most high-profile AI startups in Silicon Valley before it was cool too. So you were laying this foundation before AI got all the hype that it has now. How do you think you noticed that trend? Of course it was coming, but we didn't know when. And it seems like you timed it pretty well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Right. So it's easy to look like a genius in 2024 when you looked like an idiot from 2017 on, right?
That's the price you pay.
Yeah, that's the price to pay. I mean, I remember when I met my wife, I was like, yeah, I work at this AI startup. And she's like, oh my God, that sounds so cool. Like, is there like roller coasters and like flying cars around? And, she eventually after like the third date or something like that, she showed up and it's just like a factory with computer parts all over the ground, sleeping bags in the corner. We're using camping chairs for desk chairs. You know what I mean? It's completely unsexy. And there's at so many moments you're like, you're thinking, hey, this, we're one step away from this potentially not working out. So what ultimately got me into the space, and believe it or not, there's a single thread between Stack Overflow, Tempo Automation, and Lambda, in that they were all actually investing in machine learning. So a lot of people think of AI as just an all-encompassing word, which it is, of course, but there's some very big differences between data science and machine learning. Both are super cool, but data science is much more related to working with data that's in SQL or Excel, and it's more tabular type data, and it's finding sort of pattern recognition there and querying it, which is great. Machine learning is taking structured or unstructured sets of data and finding patterns in between them and actually producing a result without a human being that can do the pattern matching for you. So I do this a lot where I try to explain AI in 2024 to people because it's being used as a buzzword, but it's really easy to just think of it as extreme pattern matching. And so Stack Overflow had a ton of data, like a ton of data. They were a top, I think it was 50 website in terms of traffic. And so they invested a lot into data science and machine learning. Tempo Automation was using machine learning within their automated robotic factory. And although those were components of our business, it wasn't what we were selling. And I really wanted to sell AI. I wanted to be in the industry. In 2017, 2018, you had to be a researcher. You had to be an engineer. And the opportunity to work at Lambda, get in the ground floor and actually be the first sales hire at an AI company founded by AI engineers was an extremely unique opportunity that you only find walking around the dog patch of San Francisco and bumping into the CEO.
Is that a real story?
That's a real story. So the dog patch of San Francisco is kind of where all the deep tech hardware startups were pre-pandemic. I bet they still are. There's a lot of factories over there. Really good skating areas. If you're into skateboarding, there's some levels from Tony Hawk literally in the dog patch that you can go to and fail at skateboarding on. But yeah, so I ran into Steven and had a good chat in our offices. I mean, when I moved from Tempo to Lambda, I moved 2 blocks. I mean, I took the same exact way to work every day. I parked in the same exact spot. I just happened to walk a different way. But really, Scott, to answer your question, there was a video sort of put up by DeepMind talking about AlphaGo, which was really the sort of first large neural network to autonomously produce a result that was not controlled by a human being and beat the world champion of a game called Go. Now, they created a documentary about this. This documentary is amazing. It was on Netflix. I think it's just now on YouTube. as part of the training at Lambda, you have to watch that documentary. And I was so inspired by that and wanted to be involved in any way possible, right? I applied to DeepMind. They didn't have business and go-to-market roles. So, here we are today at Lambda and really in an awesome spot in terms of, 2024.
How do you go about convincing someone? So obviously you've picked up a lot of incredible knowledge about data science and machine learning along the way, but I imagine you're nowhere near as technical as many of the engineers. Walking into that conversation with these people who are absolute experts on the cutting edge of their field, and you come in and you're like, hey, I know how to sell this stuff. I know how to market this stuff. I think I could do this. Like, what was that conversation like? And it's not like they turn their nose up at go-to-market professionals, but like they kind of do a little bit. Walk me through how you were able to, I guess, sell yourself into these companies.
I love this question. The one word answer to your question is you have to care. So I was deeply sort of obsessed with artificial intelligence and machine learning and doing my best to read everything that I possibly could, knowing that I maybe only understood surface level 20 or 30% of a particular paper. And for me, that engine continues to grow, right? So there's our professional lives and what we actually do. There's the industries that we work in. And for me, I think the industry is actually the most important part. And so, even today, right, I'll put in a 60-hour week easily. When I get some free time on the weekends, I'm constantly reading about this particular space. It's a piece of enjoyment, right? It's relaxation. You got to be able to find that as a blessing, right, in life. And I really feel like I've done that. Now, to your point about convincing a technical leader, I think if you go back to sort of the mid 2000s, right, there was a sort of, and I'm not afraid to say this, kind of snootiness with technical founders, right? Everybody was coming from Google and Meta, and they were starting their own things and raising, $2 million seed rounds, which at that time was massive. And, everybody had an idea, and I've heard this a billion times from a billion technical founders, that we don't need salespeople, right? We're going to build something that sells itself. Like I literally could write a book about how many times I've heard that, right? And then ultimately, maybe you do a little bit of a PLG and you get a little bit of ARR going there. And all of a sudden you hit a wall, and then all of a sudden salespeople look like they know what they're doing, because they do. And so I'd say fast forward to 2024, there's a lot of what I see, because I only advise technical founders. If you look at my blog, I only write for technical founders, but it is relating to sales and revenue and getting them more comfortable with hiring salespeople and understanding how important we are in terms of their business. And I actually see the natural sort of organic formation of them becoming more comfortable with sales already. But how I convinced Stephen was the CEO of Lambda and the other founder, Michael, was deeply diving into the product they had, asking particular questions to the industry in the interview process, right? So let's imagine that you're at the end of an interview and you're like, hey, do you have any questions for me? Right? The worst possible thing is the person being interviewed is like, no, I think I have it all set up. It's like, okay, this is not going to work out. For me, my questions were deep about the product. How does this work? Why? Where would it fail? Right? And then deep about the industry. I read this. I want to make sure it lines up with this. Is this how I interpret it? Right? When you show that care in how you're actually preparing for an interview or talking to a technical leader, they show because they equally care, right? And so I think that ultimately is what led to the combination there, and them wanting to bring me on board.
I love that, and I bet some of those questions they hadn't actually thought about, because you're bringing a different lens to it. You're like, okay, I know I'm putting my buyer hat on now, and if I have to sell this, I have to ask different questions than I would if I was just trying to build the best product. Those are different questions, and showing them, oh, okay, there are things that maybe we don't know that we've focused on. I love that. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit. So you brought up neural networks, and you also have this idea that you've kind of borrowed from your understanding of neural networks, where running an enterprise sales process is a lot like training a neural network. And I would love to dive headfirst into that and talk me through your thinking behind that.
All right. So I feel like I should have some like fancy algorithm, or I'm sorry, fancy like name for this, right?
Let's do it. Let's pull one out of our pull one from somewhere.
I could definitely use your help after this.
All right.
Again, I want to stress that this can all sound very complex, but it's not, right? When we think about training a neural network, at the end of the day, everything comes down to pattern recognition. A really simple example that's used ad nauseum is you show a computer or a neural network a bunch of pictures of cats. You train that neural network and it says, this is a cat, this is a cat, this is a cat. Nope, this is a dog. And you eventually autonomously let that algorithm choose before you, and it has a certain high percentage of whether or not it can validate if something's a cat or a dog. That's what training a neural network is. It's getting a model to recognize patterns within data. The key word in that sentence is data. And in an enterprise sales process, I'm always just so perplexed when I speak to newer reps or I'm interviewing people. Everybody talks about their qualification criteria on their sales process. And that's great if that's like, a repeatable sale, for an SMB mid-market. But for an enterprise, to truly close a 9-figure deal in the enterprise, you are probably concurrently working 10 to 20 people at the same time. And there's a lot of data from each of those conversations, and each of them has their own concerns, their own desires, and their own wants. And you have to be able to be recognizing the pattern in between them. Okay, so this particular buyer in this group has this need. This technical leader in this group has this need, right? And you go forward. And then you actually have to be able to regurgitate that pattern back to them and convince them that this is one of the 1, 2, or 3 things that they're actually trying to solve. So what I mean by running an enterprise sales process from like training a neural network is, I believe that there's never enough data within the sales process. You constantly have to be consuming it. You constantly have to be writing it down. I interview salespeople all the time that are having conversations. They don't write anything down. How? How do you remember anything from a 20-minute conversation, right? I can actually, and I just use Google Docs. Everybody's like, what do you use? I just use Google Docs. I just write notes. And you can actually do Control F within your data set of Google Docs, and you can look up terms that are constantly being said. Oh, wow, it turns out they care about this pain. I've now heard this from 4 people, right? You can do this with Gong. You can do this with a whole bunch of tools, but you can also just do it manually in an enterprise sales process too. So understanding their pains, knowing how to connect them. So in neural networks, training neural networks, you're connecting the neurons, you're connecting the pathways. That's really important. And, even if a salesperson is selling a product that's needed in the market, it doesn't mean the buyer who has a pain is automatically going to buy it from you. And so truly finding out how, why, their pain, and really leaning on that to actually produce the end result from your model, right? So you can go into a meeting and say, Scott, you've told me X, Y, and Z. Here's exactly how we solved the problem. Here's how potentially our competitors do it. If you really want to go down that far, I don't. And then coming well prepared to an actual enterprise meeting when you're asking for a 9-figure check, that's how you do it. And so my sales reps, literally, when their preparement documents for bigger deals are not in Salesforce, sometimes they're 17 to 30 pages in Google Doc, and they are sectioned and beautifully noted. And they all have the context as to how we will win, where the areas of risk are. This is like MedPick on steroids. And I think in 2024, if you're truly doing something that big, you got to be operating in a similar context.
I love the simplicity of it too. I mean, the amount of Google Docs I have open at any given time is pretty shocking to just try and capture everything that is happening. It's not even about always just a reminder. It's about, exactly what you said. How many times is this coming up? What can we learn from this? And you can only see that when you take the time to sit down and actually pattern match it. Maybe we just call it neural networking, in the enterprise sales process. You got to get out there and do some more neural networking. We need to connect more dots.
I love it. You can see me like on a car salesman like billboard in like 5 years, right? Saying something like that.
It's the name of your upcoming book, Neural Networking by Robert Brooks.
I love it.
So there's another thing I wanted to talk to you about before we kind of dive into a story, and it's a super cool story that you have, kind of growing SpaceX from 0 to 10 mil in ARR. Before we get there, so you've been able to kind of understand how to sell to technical audiences. We kind of talked about how you first sold a technical founder. I imagine it's a similar way when you're talking to a technical buyer, but you've now been tasked with teaching sales teams to sell to technical audiences. How does one go about doing that? It is completely unique, completely different. I've actually, the only interview process that I've gone through that I didn't end up getting the role was actually because of this. They didn't think it was selling into developers, and they didn't think I think it was vibe would do well with them. And it went on to sell to Apple, so it kind of sucks. So there's some pain here for me. How do you teach salespeople how to sell to technical audiences?
It's a great question. And then, oh, by the way, we all have like a company that got away. Like I could have joined Airbnb in the early days and I didn't. So
But it all kind of works out. I actually do look at that as the best outcome did happen, because I wouldn't have joined Sales Hacker. I wouldn't have had my head up to join Sales Hacker the next thing. And then that ended up unlocking a lot of incredible stuff. So it got away, but everything goes the way it's supposed to when you look back.
Steve Jobs would say, right, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, right? So again, that's part of the pattern matching. Anyways, all right. So let me answer your question. So keep in mind that I have a very high bar for talent, which I think every revenue leader should, of course. Any salesperson can sell you in an interview. I really believe that. Most people show up fairly well. Obviously, if you don't, then like you're immediately out. But most people can show up really well. And so my bar for talent is much more related to take home assignments that relate to digesting. And I'm not talking like a technical document that has like a bunch of math all over it that only like a PhD would understand. I'm talking like an industry article that's meant for a wider reach. And I want to understand how they digested the information, what they learned from it, if they went further from the article. And then I want them to write just a couple paragraphs about it. That's my technical take-home assignment in an interview process. The key ingredient there is you and I and 10 other people can read a sentence in an article and interpret it, 12 different ways in that particular example. And I think there's risk in that if we're not able to understand what the author was trying to say and what the overall message was in the article and what the product actually does. It's really easy to miss, right? Salespeople can be very surface level. Oh yeah, man, this thing's got AI and cloud in it. Hell yeah, let's sell it, right? No.
Just open up your APIs and we'll be good.
Right. So really truthfully understanding something that's written and then being able to regurgitate. It sounds like such a simple thing, but for me is a barometer to get in the door. So that's for me for hiring. In the day-to-day, I have a couple things that I'm constantly doing with my team. One is I have all of my sales processes like methodically detailed, unfortunately in Google Docs, to the point where like I'm even like showing you how to send the calendar invite and what information I want there and how it looks and how the follow-up, like how fast it needs to be sent. Now, it's not because I'm a micromanager, right? You can do anything with that playbook, but that's the ideal state for me. And that's how I ran the sales when I was doing it in an IC role. And so reps can follow that and they can understand the sales process. And of course, there's a bunch of documentation that we can create to help them. But moreover, I'm spending my time educating my team on the market, doing a similar exercise with an article and having them regurgitate the information back to me. The reason why that's so important is no one is ever an expert. In fact, I've had an AE on my team do this exercise with me and know about a trend in the machine learning world before a technical leader at my company. he brought it up. He's like, hey man, have you ever heard about these general world models? And the guy was like, no, right? So my AE is on such a tip of the spear in our particular market. And that's gold in creating confidence with our users and our prospective customers. Confidence being the key word, okay? When you get into sales, maybe sometimes you got it and you can just do 16 a day and you can shake hands and you're excited. In a technical role, sometimes you have to build up that trust, build up that confidence. And my argument is the more you understand about the industry, the more that you can connect with that machine learning engineer or software engineer that you're selling them in a non-spammy way, the more opportunity you have to actually win. Because at the end of the day, we all know, it's probably been said on this podcast 1,000 times, people buy from people they like. And if you're over there talking over them, if you're sharing non-black and white information that sounds spammy, if you have no comprehension of the basic tenets of what they're doing, then you're really reducing your chances of actually closing the sale. So for me, in thinking about the process versus technical training, I want folks that really know how to sell, of course, but really where I spend my time is on the technical side and getting them comfortable with the industry. That the sales process, I can be involved, right? Their manager can be involved. We can look at the close loss data. We can look at the close win data. We can understand what went wrong. But if you have your guy or your leader of sales and she is at the table with the CTO, you want her to be as confident as possible in that sale. And that's ultimately what I strive for.
A lot of great stuff in there. And I just want to underscore, because it's a belief I have too, of this idea of, I guess you call it like comprehension. I think comprehension is one of the leading indicators of a salesperson's success. Your ability to take complex ideas and thoughts quickly, understand them, and distill it down into simple information. So I love that take-home assignment you do. Is it literally, just to highlight it, because I think a lot of folks should be doing this, even if it's not a technical audience, just to test for kind of comprehension and understanding, and like, can they tease out something that maybe you haven't even thought about, and because you want that diversity of thought too. It's like, oh, that might not quite be right, but that's an interesting way of looking at it. So you'll take an industry article, you'll have them read it, and then do you have them summarize it? Will it be like, where do you think this is going? Does it kind of change? Walk me through that assignment, because I think a lot of folks listening could steal it.
Yeah, of course. So I want to stress that it does not have to be a white paper, right? It can be an article from TechCrunch or VentureBeat, or, I've even done something where like a thread on Twitter, because that's where the machine learning community lives. They live on Twitter. So we live on Twitter. And digest this. Tell me what you think. What is the message? And ultimately, the main thing, the only thing I'm asking, I keep it very sort of open funnel for a reason here. I just want 2 paragraphs of you explaining what you learned and sort of giving me a key insight from what you learned. Now, the best reps will not only take what they learned, but they have this thing called Google. Like, most reps forget what it is, but they can Google things. And they can get additional context on what they just read, and they could potentially include that in their paragraphs, right? This shows that we're caring about the problem. And that's all that I want to see. To your point, Scott, I think you said something really good. It doesn't have to be right. They can make an insight from it that may be on a different path, but it certainly shows that they're critically thinking about something. And at the end of the day, that's super important.
Yeah, the comprehension, and then curiosity, and then just work ethic. I think you can find out those 3 things in that assignment. And like, especially if they're like showing their work. Hey, here's what you asked. Here's the 2 paragraphs. But like, in case you're wondering, here's how I got there. That's cool. Awesome, man. Well, I want to switch gears, so I'm going to take you back. You can let me know what year this is, but you're working with the SpaceX team.
Mm-hmm.
Early days of SpaceX, you're delivering a really crucial, tangible project that's actually like hardware. What year is this? Walk me through, like, set the stage for this time period.
This is when I was at Tempo Automation. So I was one of the first 15 employees there. I was their sales leader. I think this was in 2017, technically, when this particular story came about. So I joined Tempo in 2016. That was my first move out to the Bay Area. And Tempo was building something that still to this day gets me very excited. It's a really challenging business. They had a robotic factory in San Francisco in the dog pad. When you walked into the building, you had to wear a lab coat. I mean, it was like the coolest feeling in the world.
Straight out of like a Netflix series or something, you know?
Yeah, I felt like I worked at Jurassic Park or something. And there were some of the smartest people I've ever met working at this company. And ultimately, we don't have to go too far into it, but they were automating that factory with software and machine learning and selling a software tool that allowed electrical engineers to upload their designs on a consistent basis. So there was a SaaS element to this platform. But then when they actually ordered the project, we would take revenue from that as well. And these projects would be, ranging from $50,000 and above, and the software subscription would be anywhere from $20,000 a year to $100,000 a year. So there was a nice mix of revenue in there that was really fun to play with. SpaceX is by far one of the coolest companies I've ever been at. I had an opportunity to go down there about once a month for 2 years. I was based in San Francisco. SpaceX is based in Hawthorne, right out of LAX. And when we started working with them, they started uploading, very sort of simple designs into our systems, and our factory would produce them, and we'd just ship them out to them. So they were getting physical products at the end of the day. They were ordering them. And some of these were mission critical, and some of these had a tight deadline, but it was never too crazy. Well, SpaceX is SpaceX because if you're doing a good job, they'll ramp with you fast. And they ultimately got to a point where they were really starting to trust our processes, our business. They had people coming to our robotic factory, going through all the sort of acceptance testing processes and making sure that we were doing things that aligned with their criteria. And we got elevated in their system, which meant that we started working on more mission critical type stuff. And so the first thing that really came about was a fairly big deal, and the timeline for it was extremely tight. And it was related to an upcoming launch out of their California launch base at the time. And we got to a point where the company was ready to deliver the product and had to meet a shipping window at 5 p.m. to make it to Hawthorne that night. And the engineers expected it. Well, as we all know, potentially with software and hardware, things can go wrong. There was a 2-hour delay, and so there was no more shipping freight to be done. That meant that Robert was getting on a plane with some incredibly crucial components to a system and flying it down myself. So I think I took the last flight that you could possibly take out of San Francisco to LAX, which at that time was weirdly enough like 10:45 p.m. or 11 p.m. I was like perfectly lined up for us. I mean, we just finished everything, got it into my suitcase, got to the airport, got to the flight. And when I got to the flight, there was about a team of 3 or 4 very hardcore engineers waiting for their product. And that's one part of the process, right? So it showed that not only were we willing to do it, but we were willing to back it up, and I was willing to take my time, right? I think this was a Thursday or something like that. Of course, I was probably missing some sort of fun activity with friends, but that didn't matter. Like, the job mattered, the relationship mattered, and they did not believe that we were actually going to do this. So they were mad. You guys messed up. You missed your shipping deadline. We're screwed. You guys are the problem. Until they get a call from me that's saying, that's not the case. I'm hopping on a plane right now, and I'm delivering these to you guys at midnight. And so ultimately, I was with them until 4 a.m. at SpaceX headquarters. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. I went back to a hotel that I did not have booked and begged for a room at like 5. And about a week later, we didn't hear from them after that, which is typically a very bad sign, right? A week later, their executive team flew up, not Elon, but some higher ups there. They brought us into a room. They said, hey, can you reserve like an hour? We want to be in your boardroom. And we're just expecting, the worst of the worst, of course. They had a little bag of stuff with them when they came in. And it was the most tense sort of opening to a meeting that I've ever been a part of in my life. The first 5 minutes, they kept the guessing very high as to whether or not we did a good job and whether or not they were satisfied. And then they broke the silence with so it turns out you guys did a really good job, with just a monotone, no excitement, right? And they opened up a bag and brought out a bunch of SpaceX hats and t-shirts, and they started clapping and all that sort of stuff. But that was early in that MRR or ARR journey. And after that, lights out. I mean, the relationship was high. The projects became bigger. Thankfully, we didn't have to get on a plane again, although I was ready to do it. But ultimately, what they saw from that was, a vendor that was willing to go the extra mile, right? This wasn't someone else's problem. It was our problem to solve, and we were willing to do anything for them. That trust building, I can't, think enough. Like, maybe it's not repeatable, but sometimes you got to do things that don't scale. That's a really good example of it.
It just goes beyond software, beyond hardware, beyond solving problems. It's like, okay, I trust this human and this team now to deliver. And if there are challenges, we'll get through them together. If you could sum up kind of like the learnings beyond, turning a bad situation into a good one, like what are the learnings? How did it shift your mentality, I guess, going forward?
I mean, if I have to do the pattern recognition just in this conversation, right, I keep coming back to the idea of care. You have to care. Now, it's at some points it's harder to do these things, but when you're building a business from zero and you're a seed or a Series A company, the enterprise vendors are taking a big risk when they want to work with you, and oh boy, do they know it. And if you're willing to do things outside of the norm to show that you care, I mean, there's an executive that's literally betting her or his time on, or almost her his job
Career.
And so if you produce, not only does that make them look good, right, but it allows you to get more revenue in the door. So, for me, I've always taken that approach. When I get into sales meetings, even at like partner events, right, everybody comes up to me and they're like, yeah, man, I want to bring you business and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, great. Sounds good. What do you care about? What are your pains? Like, I just want to know. Every conversation I have through life, I want to know your pains. How can I help you solve them? If you think in that mentality, you're going to be very successful in sales.
Yeah. I think that's especially in somewhat ambiguous partnerships, you can understand very quickly, going kind of full circle what we're talking about of like incentives, of just like, how do you get comp? Like what is good for you? Well, here's how I do and my team does. So actually, I don't think this is a great partnership. Those are not aligned. Like we might look on paper that this is perfect, but maybe there's someone else in the org that has better incentives. Yeah, it's very important to understand right down to the human level, like what is driving you, what is your why, and how are you measured, basically. But I love that, man. Care. I like that keeps coming up. That'll take you far regardless of industry or how technical anything is. So I got 3 final questions as we sort of wrap up, and the first one is a listener question. I'm going to ask it even though we sort of touched on it already, and I can guess based on your previous answers where you go, but would love to hear it. The question is, we sell a technical product. Seems like you know something about that. The question is, how much of our sales training should be spent on product versus our sales and buying process? I actually love this question, and I don't think it's discussed enough. I think there's a huge focus, at least if you're on LinkedIn or whatever, on like, here's how you sell, here's the process. I guess, what is your thoughts? Where do you spend the bulk of time?
So I also love this question. I think there's different answers depending upon where you are as a company. So, earlier startup versus, Series C, D, or even, public company, that there's a little bit of a different response. I'll speak to both really quickly, and we don't spend too much time here, but I think ultimately at that early stage, you're doing founder sales. And this is why I write content for founders. I'm trying to help them understand that this is not a big scary thing. You just have to go in, and people have to have pain, but you have to write down what's working for you. And I think I've actually been fortunate to work with founders that have done that, that have had a methodical process, right? Everything that I do is actually probably driven from an engineering sort of ethos in terms of the heavy documentation, right? The meticulousness of how things should be done. Because in engineering, the thing has to work. There's no gray area, right? So for me, thinking about it like an earlier stage, if you're truly building something brand new, the sales process should be important, but you should be hiring people that have some sort of understanding of how to do that correctly. They can fail, of course, it's never going to be perfect. But my argument always goes back to, and Scott, you've already called it out, like product. It has to be the product. Here's why. In a one-on-one setting with a potential an ICP that's technical, you have a stronger opportunity to get more information out of them if it's just you two, whether you're at lunch. Ideally, you're at lunch, maybe you're at dinner. Hopefully, you're face-to-face. If not, you're on a Zoom call. If it's just you two, you have, let's call it 40% higher chance of getting actual information out of them. When you bring in a sales engineer, all of a sudden it's a 2-on-1. Do human beings like being in a 2-on-1 setting? No. They guard themselves. And here's why, because a salesperson is asking one thing from your left and a sales engineer is asking one thing from your right. That's a very not fun situation to be in for an engineer. There's too much compute happening in their heads. So if you get to a one-on-one setting, again, I don't expect you. I ask my salespeople, I want you to get past conversation 1 and 2. That's all I want you to do, singularly. Then let's bring in the technical team that can actually help close this deal. But you need to build the relationship and you need to understand their pains. And you need to your point earlier, understand that they're human. They have lives, they have needs, they have desires. That's where you need to focus to start. It's so easy to come into a sales first call and just talk about pricing. We all get it, right? You're paid because you don't talk about pricing in that first call. You talk about the relationship, you talk about the pain. So the only way you're going to be comfortable in that one-to-one setting is if you're doing your best to level up on the product and the industry. And there are certain training pathways that you can take the call or the one-on-one meeting that don't pigeonhole you based on something that's too technical. And so you have to figure that out, but that's just trial and error. I think that's, something that I help my teams out with quite a bit.
Makes total sense. So would it be fair to say then, if there's a spectrum of training, and on one side there's product, on one side there's process, in the earlier stages, you're pretty hard on the product, and then as you grow as a company, it's going to start shifting more and more into process as you've built in repeatability, kind of scalability. You've seen what works, and then maybe you can take the gas off product knowledge a little bit and focus more on process as you're growing. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to this question, right? Because if you have a sales leader, I would expect them to be driving process and not just telling you what to do, but showing you how to do it. We have a really good sort of training document internally at Lambda on how to write a cold email, where I literally walk you through how my brain sees Scott Barker's LinkedIn profile, looks at his description, Googles who he is, right? Understands what he cares about, what he's talking about, what he's commenting on LinkedIn, understands what his companies do. And then I craft a 3-sentence or 4-sentence or 5-sentence email. That's true. That's why a VP is a VP or a sales manager is a sales manager. They can do that. And they should be doing that for their reps. At the end of the day, the folks on the field, the folks that are taking the 10 meetings a day, they need to be, as up to speed on product as possible, as fast as possible, and hopefully following that process from a leader. If you're doing it yourself, unfortunately, you've chosen that path and you got to do it both at the same time. That's what I love. But sometimes a sales process can never be concrete to the point of my documents. They are constantly changing. Now, in the earlier days of Lambda, they changed a lot from quarter to quarter. Now they're pretty rigid, but there's a flexibility within the sales process too.
The dance between art and science a little bit. Like here's the science, and then giving your reps, the ability to be artists in certain scenarios as well. All right, final 2 questions, and again, these are intentionally vague, so take them whichever way you want. First question, this is the hot take question. What is one widely held belief that revenue leaders hold today that you think is bullshit, or at least no longer serving us?
So I love this question, and I got to caveat that this is fairly controversial in terms of
that's why we have this question.
Right. How we think about sales today. Well, it's even controversial internally to me, and I'll explain what that means. And it's really not a controversial idea. Okay, I'll just say what it is. So I believe in full stack account executives. I do not believe in breaking up the process for as long as you possibly can. Everybody starts out at companies like, yeah, let's get a BDR team and an account management team and a sales team. And these are hunters and these are farmers. That's great. I think that works. I know it works because I'm doing it now. But I've held on to full stack account executives for as long as I possibly can. And it is a non-scalable thing, going back to some of my earlier comments. So I don't necessarily think it's bullshit, and I don't think it's serving us well, but I think in the earlier days, if you just, let's say you get hired as, CRO, VP of sales, director of sales, it's a 10-person, 30-person, 50-person startup. You got to build a team of 5 AEs, and you have headcount for 5 AEs. I'm hiring 5 AEs that are full stack, that are doing the prospecting, they're doing the closing, and they're doing the account management. Again, things break. I'm not saying this is repeatable, but in the early days of really understanding your customers, really understanding what's working, the more minimal you can keep that feedback loop between those things, the better you're going to be in terms of actually building something that is repeatable, that can scale to BDRs, account managers, and account executives. So, and again, for me, sometimes I hold on to it too long because as a user, and especially as a technical buyer, I don't want to talk to Scott, who qualifies me, and then get handed over to Robert, who's in 15 meetings a day and only has an hour for me, and then hear from Andrea, who follows up in the notes. And then I don't know who to go to. Am I going to Andrea, Scott, or Robert, right? And I try and reach Robert, and he's unavailable. And then Scott is all over me, right? Sorry to use your name here. But, and then and Andrea, maybe has 15 other things that she's focusing on. And so I think in the early days of sales, really like founder sales, getting that wrong can really, really hurt. And I would argue that full stack account executives, if I can ever find one and when I'm interviewing, I immediately 50% more want to hire them. You've experienced the pain of a BDR, an SDR account manager. Maybe you've even done something that's looked like CS a little bit. And you hunted. Like sales reps try and sell me all day how they don't have time. Bullshit. I've done it. I've literally done it. Like I know that you can do it too, right? So again, that's one example there that I'm really sort of in the early days. Yeah.
It's a great example. And so the thinking behind that, from what I heard, is kind of twofold. One, these individuals are getting more cycles in, therefore their learning is, expedited. They can then transfer that learning into the organization quicker. They're not just getting pieces of the journey, they're getting the full thing. And then the second is just strictly from the buyer's experience. In the early days, you want to win hearts and minds. You need to have, the best experience possible so that they maybe forgive flaws that happen with the product or whatever. Are those the two main drivers between wanting to have full stack?
Yeah. I mean, again, we keep going back to the neural network, right? The pattern recognition you get from prospecting to closing to account management. There's something there. You're training your own neural network. And it's a better feedback loop to product as well. Hey, I reached out to this awesome autonomous vehicle startup. I actually closed them on this smaller deal than I wanted to. It's a little bit of a pilot, and then it didn't go well. But I know the entire history of that account, and I can tell product about it. It's a very unique thing in an early stage company where you're getting that good feedback to product.
That's a good example. Got my brain going. Yeah, because if you break that piece up, the feedback that's getting back is, hey, we shouldn't sell to these. Because if you're taking like CS, for example, it didn't go well. So the only feedback you're getting from there is, we shouldn't sell to this type of company because it didn't go well.
Right.
And then I have one final question for you. It is tough times out there, and everyone's looking for different things that are working. What is one go-to-market tactic or strategy that's working today for the Lambda team?
Again, I might sound a little bit old school here, right? I remember my VP of sales when I was getting started. They were like, the deal's in the pipeline. I haven't committed. They're like, have you met him? Have you met him in person? Like, no, it's good. No. You need to meet them in person, right? So, of course, that's one focus. But for us, one tactic that we're actually seeing a lot of success with, and I think there's a lot of companies that are starting to do this well, is just around an industry event and or conference, setting up an executive briefing center adjacent to that conference, and having an incentive for prospective people in your audience to visit. Right? Let's call those lunches, or let's just call those singular meetings with, meet the CEO, or we're unveiling a new product and we'd like to show that to you ahead of launch, right? Getting executives an incentive to come, and then having it be set up at a very nice place, right? Like a hotel or even a restaurant that's a little bit more exclusive, good food. You can tell that there's like some thought and care behind that. And maybe it's like a block or two away from the conference. Now, this stuff is expensive, okay? We're not talking this is something you just pull a rabbit out of the hat. You really need to think about this and have a little bit of help from marketing on it. But we've seen that be a very successful tactic for us. We can throw that into dinners as well. We can throw that into lunches. We can actually have our engineering team there to do a little bit of a demo. So you need a sort of a cross-functional buy-in to get that right. But I think for us, meeting people in person, hopping on a plane. I mean, I'm on a plane to California every 15 days. I live in Florida. And this is part of the game. This is what you signed up for. This is why you have the opportunity to make life-changing money as a salesperson. But you got to do the work to do it, right? You got to meet people in person. You got to be comfortable in that one-on-one or in-person type of setting. So that's been working really well for us.
Cannot agree more on the in-person. That's why I'm on planes, a couple times a month as well. Nothing beats it. I actually think it's more powerful post-COVID than it was pre-COVID. I'm seeing the connection now is pretty unique when you're one of the few, because a lot haven't kind of readopted that strategy. They've thought that they could get away with it. And so it does make you stick out when you take the time to be in person. I love the idea of an executive briefing center. We did something like this at Outreach at kind of the penthouse at one of the hotels right by Moscone Center. And it was like really cool, exclusive. And you kind of almost pitch it, or at least we did, as like, come and like meet the team. It won't be like, if you want to get technical, we can get technical, but like, let's have a executive level conversation of like what is coming down the pipe. But I love that. That's a great, super actionable, tactical thing that folks can take away. Well, Robert, man, this has been one of the more interesting conversations I've had in a long time, man. You're such a pro, and we're fortunate to have you in the GTM community. Anything you want to shout out? I mean, like, are you hiring any roles right now? Anything cool coming up in your world that people should know about?
Yeah, absolutely. And so Scott, just on GTM Fund and being an LP and participating here and having the opportunity just to speak with you. Like I said, before we got started here, I've known about you and for a long time, and Sales Hackers for a long time. There's been a ton of respect there. So, one of the best examples of how I use GTM Fund, the community that you built, is sometimes I go in there and ask questions to other revenue leaders and get help. But more often than not, I can go in a Slack channel, click find, and find like conversations that have already happened about this from people that I trust. So think about shortening my path towards information, right? And having a network I can rely on, incredible opportunity. As far as what, on the Lambda side, I mean, we have some product launches coming up. We have some really good PR coming up, which is really great. I'm definitely hiring account executives that are familiar in the cloud world, that they don't necessarily have to be full stacks anymore, but if they like that, all the better. Always interested in talking to a marketing and sales leader that wants to work for an AI company and has a little bit of a technical background as well.
Love it. Wow. Thank you for the love on GTM Fund, and I'm sure you're going to be getting a lot of people hitting you up on LinkedIn after hearing this interview. Wanted to work at Lambda. Well, I appreciate you, my friend, and of course, to all our listeners, I always appreciate you. And I say it every week, but listening is one thing. Executing is something totally different. Hopefully, you take some of these tactics and strategies and stories, run them through your own neural network and pattern matching, and hopefully apply to your world and help you hit your numbers and scale your organization. And we'll see you all next week.